This from Garland Nixon here, friend of the show, calling out the hypocrisy. Because now, the reason why I say I love that the ICC did this. I love the establishment went after Putin for war crimes, because now this opened up this massive conversation that had to be had. What about George W. Bush, where Barack Obama famously said, "Oh, we just need to move on. We need to heal as a nation." Doing his job was to go in and to defend the Wall Street criminals, which he did by appointing Wall Street selected goon Eric Holder to defend the people who tanked the black economy, who tanked homeowners. The same way Barack Obama was chosen to defend Wall Street, he was there to defend the war criminal neocons in the George W. Bush administration, where he was like, "Oh, come on, let's chill out. Let's chill out. Let's move past it. Let's heal." Right? No, I thought this was supposed to be a country where no one is above the rule of law. This blatantly points out the hypocrisy in these anti-Trump, like these Jennifer Rubin types, right? These Michael Steele types, like these Republicans. They're like, "Oh, I hate Trump, but George W. Bush was back when Republican was great." This is just a great article from Truth Out. I'll just read this. For 20 years, Team Bush has escaped prosecution for their war crimes in Iraq. So, God forbid, people call for George W. Bush to be held accountable for your war crimes. Now you got all these people who never even used the word war crime, didn't even hear about imperialism, never talk about imperialism. All of a sudden, they want to talk about it regarding a territorial dispute between Russia and Ukraine. Now, let's get into this segment on Medhi here, because when I show you guys this segment, Medhi is a sellout of the highest order. He made his name being extremely critical of the Iraq and Afghanistan war, being critical of Israel, where he still raises tough questions on Israel, but he's definitely lightening his tone recently, right? But now he did a straight up MSNBC liberal Democratic shell of the highest order. And as I said earlier, he just had a thought. He's like, "Man, it'd be a good segment if I explore the fact that we should go after George W. Bush for war crimes the same way that we go after Vladimir Putin." This obviously ignored the fact that you guys support Joe Biden, who support multiple genocides, who escalated for World War III, who also support the Iraq war. So that's what I don't get. So Mehdi Hasan, they say we should prosecute George W. Bush for the Iraq war. But what about the senators that was involved in lying about that as well? People don't know. Joe Biden had a Senate commission. He had a commission that he had with Anthony Blinken as his advisor, where they had these sham trials to justify why we should invade Iraq. And he would stack these panels with a bunch of neocon weapon defense contractors, no anti-war voices. And then he did his sham trial and said, "Oh, after our conclusion, we found that we must go into Iraq." Joe Biden played a very critical role in that. He lies and said he was tricked by George Bush. He knew that they was lying. But no, he played a very crucial part in manufacturing consent for the war in the Senate. So I don't understand Medhi's position, where you support going after George W. Bush, but you still like Joe Biden, who was just as complicit. But let's watch this debate. This is something else. I'll let it play.
Earlier this month, the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin for his role in the alleged abduction of Ukrainian children. While these represent the first official charges, it is far from the only war crime that Putin could and should be indicted for. I'm thinking about Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, the invasion itself. Notably, these charges against Putin came the same week as the 20-year anniversary of America's illegal invasion of Iraq, which is interesting and kind of relevant because in a speech Vladimir Putin gave on the eve of his own illegal...
And for some reason, Mehdi Hasan has nothing to say about Syria. Like, I gotta look, but I've never seen these segments on Syria. Joe Biden is illegally occupying and stealing Syrian resources as we speak. But Mehdi Hasan, he's not going to say anything about that. That's why he's deeply unimpressive to me. In fact, people who like him, who sell out, who make their name as some sort of progressive, anti-war journalist, and then get accepted by the establishment, and then run cover for neocons and war criminals of the Democratic Party and the establishment, they are about as disgusting as it gets. Because, yeah, okay, big boy, you calling out George W. Bush. Big deal. That's easy. That's easy. Are you going to call out Anthony Blinken? Are you going to call out Lloyd Austin? Are you going to call out Joe Biden and his complicity of the Iraq War? There is nothing brave about being a rank partisan. And I'm tired of people believing that's the case.
Invasion. He pointed to, quote, the invasion of Iraq without any legal grounds. They used the pretext of allegedly reliable information available in the United States about the presence of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and all of that was a fake and a sham. Now, put aside Putin's bad faith and self-serving invocation of the Iraq war, the question still remains, if Putin should be prosecuted for his war crimes, then why shouldn't Bush as well?
Why shouldn't Biden?
I posed this question to former US Ambassador Michael McFaul on the 11th hour on MSNBC last week. Hold on, Vladimir Putin, rightly, there's a case against him.
Well, if you guys don't know who this guy is, look at the guy that Mehdi Hasan brings on, and they like good friends. They always chum in with each other. This guy on the right is a psychopath who often calls for nuclear war in World War III. He criticizes the United States for not doing enough. He be calling for like fucking direct bombings and retaliation against Russia, and he's like, man, Biden doing a good job, but we need to do more for Ukraine. This dude is a psychopath of the highest order. But of course he has a position. Look, this is what Medhi brings up to him.
Gets an arrest warrant for his illegal invasion of Ukraine, and yet George W. Bush is still swanning around painting paintings, swapping cough drops with Michelle Obama. What about that double standard?
I think the war in Europe today is categorically different. This is a war of imperialism. It's a war of annexation.
But the war of Iraq is not. The war of Syria is not, where they literally stealing the resources. Do you guys see why this guy is my enemy? Why this guy is as disgusting as it gets? This guy see brown people, Muslims. George W. Bush literally says it's like a religious war. He said, God told me to invade Iraq. This is a definition of a religious, imperialist, violent war that is responsible for millions of deaths, 2 million Iraqis dead, millions more displaced. But that's different. What we see in Europe and Ukraine is different. We're not going to war with those. It's not war with savages like Iraqis. These people are disgusting. You guys want to hear that part again?
Painting paintings, swapping cough drops with Michelle Obama. What about that double standard?
I think the war in Europe today is categorically different. This is a war of imperialism. It's a war of annexation. And I think it puts it in a different category.
How?
That exchange caught the attention of conservative writer and author Tom Nichols of The Atlantic. He took exception to what he felt was an unfair comparison between Ukraine and Iraq, tweeting, quote, the Russians are invading Ukraine to overthrow a democratic government and absorb Ukraine into a Russian empire. The allied coalition in Iraq deposed a tyrant who violated a ceasefire and then did everything it could to restore Iraq as an
what
state.
Historical revision?
To which I replied, the question, Tom, was about Bush and Putin. You can dress up Iraq as a liberal intervention all you like, but Bush violated international law, national sovereignty, and killed plus tortured.
So when Putin invades Ukraine, he does it because he's an evil maniac who wants to commit genocide against the Ukrainian people for no reason. But when the United States crosses an entire fucking ocean and invades Iraq, we did it with the goodness of our heart, with best intention. No, they invaded Iraq and immediately set up a police state where they would set up checkpoints. They kidnapped people, sent them to Guantanamo Bay. People was kidnapped and tortured innocent civilians because they did not tell the United States government what they wanted to hear. It's one of the greatest geopolitical crimes of the last century. When you look at the death and destruction, generations, they're going to feel this. People still feel this to this day. I dare one of these insane neocons to look at someone who's a victim of the Iraq war and tell them that their war and their suffering is inherently different than the blonde, blue-eyed Ukrainians. Look those people in the eye and tell them that. These people are disgusting. If they want me to think People want me to think that Donald Trump is worse than these people. And look at the guy that Medhi's about to debate. This is unbelievable.
A whole bunch of innocent people. Of course, it spiraled from there, as so many Twitter spats do. But in my defense, I am far from the only one who thinks about Iraq when Ukraine comes up. Listen to this guy.
The result is an absence of checks and balances in Russia and the decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of of Ukraine. Iraq, anyway.
That was, how does the saying go, the Freudian slip to end all Freudian slips.
One of my favorite stories ever.
I invited Tom Nichols to continue our Twitter beef, this time on TV, where the discourse is famously much more cordial. He joins me now. Tom was formerly a professor for the U.S. Naval War College and is currently staff writer for The Atlantic. He wrote this piece on the 20-year anniversary, acknowledging that he would no longer call it.
So I want you guys to understand, this guy writes for the fucking Atlantic. This guy, he about to debate Tom Nichols, who is crazier than that Ukraine op that we saw earlier. This guy is somehow crazier than him. But he got a spot on the Atlantic. And once you hear this guy's opinion, you guys are going to realize why we're the most propagandized country in the world. I have to go on YouTube. We got to go on Substack. Say Hirsch has to go on Substack. Meanwhile, people like this guy writes on the Atlantic. Now, I'm going to show you guys. I'm going to let the video play so you guys can see how unbelievably unhinged this guy is.
Iraq a just war today, as he had at the time. Nevertheless, he still takes issue with my Ukraine-Iraq comparison, which we'll get into now. Tom, as always, thank you for coming on the show. The 20th anniversary of George Bush's illegal invasion of Iraq almost exactly coincided with that arrest warrant issued by the ICC for Vladimir Putin over Ukraine. So why is it wrong? Why is it invidious and inaccurate, as you say, to compare Ukraine with Iraq, to compare Vladimir Putin's crimes with George Bush's, as so many people around the world have been doing in recent days?
Well, Medhi, the way you phrase that is a classic and literal example of begging the question, because you've started with Bush's illegal invasion of Iraq. We're talking about an invasion that was accompanied by 3 other military powers and supported by 30 countries, including important American allies in Europe and other countries around the world. There's a difference. I mean, international law.
Bro, the argument that this man just used is that the invasion of Iraq is different because unlike Putin's invasion of Ukraine, there's a bunch of war criminals in the West. There's Tony Blair, the war criminal in the UK, war criminal in France, and people who are puppets of the United States empire. They supported the war in Iraq, so that's okay. So what they say is a group of white people say this is okay. Meanwhile, when Russians invade, that's not okay. That's literally the height of intellectual argument that you get from these people. Let's continue. Let's play that part again. I get the full answer.
Including American of Iraq. We're talking about an invasion that was accompanied by 3 other military powers and supported by 30 countries, including important American allies in Europe and other countries around the world. There's a difference. I mean, international law, I don't want us to devolve into what UN Security Council resolutions mean, but the Russians and the French and the Brits and the Americans disagreed about what Resolution 1441 really meant. That the Americans and the Brits said serious consequences mean serious consequences. It means military consequences.
So it's not a war crime
because
because we said
the
so.
giant raft of UN security resolutions that had been there for 12 years, including violating a ceasefire. If you violate a ceasefire and hostilities break out again, you don't get to claim that it's an illegal war. The thing I really took issue with here is I think it's not that it's an insult to Bush and the Americans. I mean, as you saw in my piece, I mean, I thought that deposing Saddam, even in the 1990s, on humanitarian grounds, particularly attempted genocide, was a just cause. But the way the Americans and their allies executed this was a complete fiasco, and I don't deny that now. Yeah. But I think by comparing them, you're letting Putin off the hook. You're simply drawing too easy a comparison to someone who did not actually approach the international community, did not have other allies, did not make a case at the United Nations, did none of those things, and just said, Ukraine isn't a real place. These people will either accept my rule or die. And by comparing that to Iraq, I just think you're letting Putin off too easily.
Millions dead. 2.2 million dead in Iraq. Millions displaced. But somehow, even mentioning the fact that George W. Bush should be tried for war crimes, that lets Putin off the hook for some reason. How can you not hold these two thoughts at the same time? How can you not say we should try Putin for war crimes in Ukraine, and we should definitely try George W. Bush for what he did in Iraq? Well, I would add, because what George W. Bush did in Iraq is definitely worse. But you don't even have to say that. But the fact that he can't even say that is ridiculous. And Medhi actually comes back pretty well at him, so I'll let it continue.
So it's a good point you make. It's wrong, but it's a good point, because I think the person who's letting people off the hook is you. I've spent the last year on this show condemning Vladimir Putin from the very beginning and slamming people on the left and right who give him a pass.
Slamming people on the left, meaning people like us. When I say NATO left, who you guys think I'm talking about? I'm talking about this guy, Mehdi Hasan. He is the prime time biggest example of what it means to be a NATO leftist. This guy made his name calling out the Iraq war, debunking the lies of the Iraq and Afghanistan war, calling out the lies of the Zionist and Israeli lobby. And this is what the progressives do all the time. They say, oh man, I see through the lies of Vietnam. I see through the lies of Iraq. Our government always lies for war. I read how war is a racket. I read Noam Chomsky manufacturing consent. And then the latest war come out. The new shit come out. The new shit come out, and they fall for the new shit. The people that they pat themselves on the back all the time talking about how they're a historian. Man, it's crazy. Man, they lie about Vietnam and what they did to Korea. Man, there was a genocide in Korea. Man, they lie. Government lies all the time, except this time. Mike Bolton is a war criminal. Mike Pompeo is a war criminal. All these people is a war criminal, except this time. I'm sure they have the best intentions of the Ukrainian people at heart. That's why Mehdi Hasan, even though he cooks this guy, I will admit, as we watch it, you'll see Medhi does cook this guy. But I am deeply unimpressed with these people that say, "Oh yeah, I see through Iraq, but you fall for the new shit." And don't get it twisted. This guy is a rank propagandist because he's all in for Joe Biden. Love Joe Biden, right? All in for Joe Biden. Every argument that he makes toward George W. Bush right now applies to Joe Biden regarding the Iraq war and his current military activities, including Syria. But he's too much of a coward to make them. So I will admit, he cooks his boy in this debate, but do not be impressed by Mehdi Hasan by any stretch of the imagination.
If anyone's being let off the hook, it's George W. Bush. The entire world is condemning Putin right now. It's Bush who, as I pointed out elsewhere, swapping cough drops, painting...
That's another lie. The entire world is not condemning Bush. The entire world is not condemning Putin. It's only the Western empire that's quickly losing geopolitical influence. You guys are condemning Putin. Now the U.S. dollar, the petrodollar is dying. What a flex, United States. Great job. But sorry, I let his full statement play. I keep interrupting. I let it play.
Slamming people on the left and right who give him a pass. If anyone's being let off the hook, it's George W. Bush. The entire world is condemning Putin right now. It's Bush who, as I pointed out elsewhere, swapping cough drops, painting paintings, getting rehabilitated. And I worry about this line from you that you can't compare the two because one is worse or one was done differently. And the analogy I keep thinking of, Tom, is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Joe and Bob both commit a murder. Bob's murder is far more brutal and violent than Joe's murder. So Tom Nichols comes along and says, well, we should only prosecute Bob's murder, not Joe. Don't compare Joe's murder to Bob's. No, both are murders. Both are violations of law. We can argue about which one's worse, but both deserve to be held to account.
Medhi just cooked this boy. Just cooked him with that analogy. But the same thing applies to the Democratic Party, Medhi. The same thing. And those blinders, it's glaring to me. I give him credit while I gotta let you guys know this dude's full of shit at the same time.
Well, in the words of Ronald Reagan, Medhi, there you go again, because you're saying both are murders. I would argue that one of them is not a war crime. An ill-advised war, yes. An incompetently executed war, absolutely. But the idea that Bush said, I know that this cause is completely wrong. I know that these facts are wrong. I'm going to do it for, profit or personal revenge or whatever it is. Multiple investigations over 20 years and interviews with the people who were.
This man is a psychopath. George W. Bush said he was told by God to invade Iraq. That's a holy war, guys. God told him to invade a majority Muslim country. And then they went there and fucked shit up. As Stephanie Carroll said, I see you guys in the chat sometimes. 1 million Iraqis dead. The numbers are everywhere. I've seen 2.2 million. That's the number I've seen. I've seen numbers all over the place. I go with 2.2 million. Over 1 million more have been displaced. But that's not a war crime. I'm asking you guys, why do you guys think he has this ideology? This guy, whether he knows it or not, whether liberals knows it or not, this guy is a white supremacist. This guy is a unhinged warmonger. When he sees million dead Muslims and brown people, that's not a war crime. But blonde, blue-eyed people being killed is a war crime. That is subtle, deeply ingrained white supremacy, and these liberals don't even realize it. That's what I see. And Western chauvinism in its worst form. Jennifer Lee. According to this guy, one white death is worse than 1 million non-white deaths. And that is what liberals deeply believe. That is what these people deeply believe. That is what Jennifer Rubin deeply believes. The people at the Lincoln Project, that is what they deeply believe. Do not let anyone fool you think they are somehow better than Trump.
Were involved in the decision to go into this war just don't show that. And so you keep coming back to this is a war crime because you've defined it as a war crime, but the international community has not. But I think Bush is taking...
What? So he says, what you are saying, Medhi, you are saying George Bush did war crimes. I disagree. I don't think George Bush did war crimes in Iraq. A crazy claim. And then he said the reason why we don't, this is different because the global international community, which is made of war criminals, the global international Western community that literally live on a throne of lies and hypocrisy, they look the other way on George W. Bush, but they're calling out Putin. So that is enough. Our authority is enough. You don't believe your lying eyes. I know you think there are a lot of dead Iraqis there. But Boris Johnson said it's not. Emmanuel Macron said it's not. This is disgusting. How is this worse than Trump? I mean, how is Trump worse than this? I don't like Trump, but people pretend Trump is the worst thing ever. This guy is worse than Trump and all his MAGA acolytes. This guy is as insane as it is. Because as bad as Donald Trump is, Donald Trump talks about how horrible Iraq is. Donald Trump mentioned how George W. Bush should be tried for war crimes for Iraq. You know he said that? This guy disagrees to Trump's right. He's on Trump's right. Trump says we should prosecute Bush for war crimes. He says no. But liberals think this guy is better than Trump. Mika Brzezinski and Joe Scarborough rather have this Republican than Donald Trump. Let's continue. I'm gonna let it play just a little bit more. I think I made a lot of my points. I'll let it play just a little bit longer. I think I made a lot of my points.
And plenty of arrows over 20 years, as he should. But I think part of the problem is that it just galls you that he hasn't been treated in the same category as Putin.
Oh, it does.
And while I understand
100% it galls me. 100% it galls me. And it's funny that you should mention. It's funny that you should mention Reagan. Another day we'll get you back on to talk about his war crimes in places like Guatemala and Lebanon elsewhere. But so let's stick with Bush because you keep saying
I'll be here. I'll defend
community.
any war criminal. I defend any war criminal. As long as you do crimes under the United States government, I'm all in. But people are afraid of Muslims? People are afraid of Mexicans. They want us to hate our neighbors when this guy is walking around. This guy is way more dangerous than any criminal or thug that you're afraid of. Way more gangster than any Mexican cartel member.
Look, Tom, you're a very smart man. You're a former professor at the Naval College. I believe you're a 5-time Jeopardy champion. But last time I checked, you have 0 legal qualifications. Most international lawyers who have commented on Iraq around the world, including the UN Secretary General at the time, Kofi Annan, said it was an illegal war. And I just want to pull up UN Resolution 1441, because you keep bringing up the UN. Let's just talk about UN Resolution 1441. Passed in November 2002, 4 months before the invasion. For our viewers, let's remind them, you point out rightly it gave Iraq one final opportunity, warned of serious consequences, but it also said the Security Council should remain seized of the matter. It didn't give permission to Bush and Blair to make war on Iraq. It didn't use the phrase all necessary means. And you don't have to take my word for it. I just want you to listen to the US and UK ambassadors at the UN at the time, the 2 guys who helped draft it. Have a listen.
This resolution contains no hidden triggers and no automaticity with respect to the use of force.
There is no automaticity in this resolution. If there is a further Iraqi breach of its disarmament obligations, the matter will return to the Council for discussion as required in operative paragraph 12.
No automaticity, no hidden triggers. We promised to come back to the Security Council, but they didn't. The majority of the Security Council rejected their view of 1441, and Kofi Annan called it an illegal war. A Dutch government inquiry called it an illegal war. The top law lords in the UK called it an illegal war, and yet George Bush has never been held legally to account for it.
Imagine how horrible you got to be cooked by Mehdi Hasan. Mehdi Hasan just cooked this man. Just cooked him. Called him out on his rank, unapologetic lie. This man went on corporate media in front of millions of people. Hundreds of thousands. Few thousands, right? And he told a lie like, yeah, George W. Bush invasion of Iraq is different than the invasion of Ukraine, because unlike the invasion of Ukraine, everyone in the West, all these organizations, they didn't really care about Iraq. What did I tell you guys? They are actively trying to rewrite the Iraq war and the war on terror. And that's why we need independent media. That's why I'm doing what I do. We need more truth tellers, because they're doing it in plain sight. Trying to pretend that George W. Bush is a cuddly, gentle soul who was misled, and there was a war that was waged by mistake. No, there was a malicious war that was built on lies. Lies. They are rewriting it, and this guy is trying it. He's trying to do it. Oh, the international community, other civil rights organizations, they wasn't that pissed off at the Iraq war. Straight up revisionism. And they will be successful if they win, because winners write the history books. And we don't fight this shit. Let's I'll let you see his response, and I'll wrap the segment up. He got caught for a lie.
First, I'll say, since we were appealing to authority here and that I have no legal bona fides, I will say I did write a whole book about this back in 2008.
No one gives a fuck about your book.
My big concern then as now is that the United States and other nations have now opened the door to preventive war as a means of statecraft, which I think is incredibly dangerous, and I think something that we don't talk enough about. But in terms of indicting George Bush, if someone wants to take it before the world court and indict George Bush, they should, then make the case, because I think what happened at the UN, and I agree with you, there was no automaticity. On the other hand, the Security Council had an understanding within itself that we would have a fair hearing on this if Iraq decided one more time not to comply. And I would argue that, with the exception of China, who basically backed out of this and said, Saddam's bringing this on himself. We don't want any part of it. We're not really going to participate in this debate. The French and the Russians said, bring it back to the Security Council, because that we will never agree to this. And the Brits and the Americans said, we'll bring it back to the Security Council because we're going to go after him once he defaults once again.
That doesn't make it legal. That's great, but that doesn't make it legal.
If you guys can watch the rest of this, only 5 minutes left. I'll cut the segment there. Medhi calls him out for his unapologetic rank lies. And he panics and they said, well, actually, there's none but bunch of bullshit to cover for the fact that he lies and said that invasion of Iraq by George W. Bush is somehow different because George W. Bush had Western countries on this side. Look at the military deals that was made in Africa by Russia and South Africa, the expansion of BRICS, China expanding, China, one of the biggest geopolitical powers, soon to be the #1 superpower in the world, friendly with Russia. Xi Jinping visited Putin. They said their relationship is stronger than ever. So using that guy's argument, hey, China not mad at Russia for their invasion of Ukraine. So doesn't that make the invasion of Ukraine okay based on that guy's logic? That guy's logic was the West is okay with the invasion of Iraq. So George W. Bush should be tried. So his view is deeply elitism. If it's our oligarchs, if it's our ruling class, they are above the rule of law, unless they pay a porn star off, right?